So, 10.6, we are using and recognizing the number properties. We learned this in pre-algebra. So what we're going to be doing is reviewing each property and then coming up with our own examples for each one. Okay? So, commutative property. The way I always remember commutative property, it changes the location of the numbers or variables. Does anybody know what the word commute means? It means to go back and forth, right? So commute means to go back and forth. Like if I tell you that I commute to work every day, that means that I drive to work and then I drive home every day. So commute means going back and forth. So the commutative property changes the location of the numbers or variables. So let's think of an example. What about 2 plus 3 is the same as 3 plus 2? That's the commutative property of addition. Okay? 2 plus 3 equals 3 plus 2. Can you think of one with a variable in it?
2m times.
Okay. You guys are making it really complicated. Okay. How about x plus 4 is the same as 4 plus x? That's all I mean. Okay? So what about the commutative property of multiplication?
7x.
6 times 2 is 12, which is the same as 2 times 6, right? So I can just flip the numbers. So what about one with variables in it?
X. Or 8 times 3.
I'm hearing so much different. How about x times 3 is the same as 3 times x, right? Now we can write it with the multiplication, but then we always write our answer as just 3x, right? Okay? So that's commutative. It changes the location of the numbers or the variables. Okay? What about associative? What does the word associate mean? To talk to hang out with. It's a group of people, right? So the word associate is the same as like a group of people that you hang out with. So it can be hang out with, a group, like association. Okay, so the associative property changes the way the numbers or variables are grouped. For example, for addition, I could group 3 plus 4 plus 5, right? And that's the same as if I grouped 3 plus 4 and added 5. If we follow order of operations on the left-hand side, what do I have to do first? Parentheses. So 4 plus 5 gives me 9. Plus 3 gives me 12. And so if we look at the right-hand side, I group them differently. So 3 plus 4 gives me 7, plus 5 gives me 12. So the way I group them doesn't matter, right? Okay, what about with variables? It's the same thing for variables. We could have x plus y plus z, and that's the same as x plus y plus z. So the way that we group them does not make a difference. Same thing for multiplication. For example, 2 times 3 times 4 is the same as 2 times 3 times 4. Correct? 3 times 4 gives me?
I thought you don't have to use the dot before parentheses.
12. And 12 times 2 gives me 24. 2 times 3 gives me 6 times 4, 24. So the order doesn't matter, right? This is the same as x times y times z, as if I grouped x times y times z. So the order, or the way we group them, does not matter. Associative property. Very careful. Did you all notice how the order is the same each time? So the order did not change. That's commutative. This is just where the parentheses are. Our favorite property, distributive property. Don't you guys like distributive? Multiplies, the distributive property multiplies every number inside the parentheses by the number on the outside of the parentheses. So, what if I have 3 times x plus 4? I'm using distributive property, so that means I carry the 3 into the parentheses. 3 times x gives me 3x plus 3 times 4? 12. I think that identities are the most difficult. We have 2 identities. There's 2 identity properties. We have what is called the additive identity, so it has to do with adding. And then we have the multiplicative identity, so it has to do with multiplication. Okay, identities do not change the value of the number. So the additive identity is what? Who knows? What number, when you add it, does not change the value? 0. So the additive identity is 0. Because when you add 0 to any number, it does not change the value of that number. So additive identity does not change the value. So what do you think the multiplicative identity would be? Good. 1. The multiplicative identity is 1 because when you multiply any number by 1, it does not change the value of that number. So identity means we are not changing the value. Okay? So we don't want it to change. So for addition, that would be 0 because we can add 0 to anything and you get the same answer. For multiplication, that would be 1 because you can multiply anything by 1 and still get the same answer, right? So identities do not change the value. Last thing we have to worry about is inverses. Inverses do change the value. And actually, inverses try to get you to the identity. So for example, the additive inverse. Additive inverse is trying to get us to 0. So what would I add to 5 to get to 0? Negative 5. So it's the opposite of a number. So let's use that example. 5, the opposite would be negative 5. What if my number was negative 3? What would the opposite of that be? Positive 3. Okay? I think the one that's always the hardest to remember, multiplicative inverse. Yeah, the multiplicative inverse, we are trying to get to the multiplicative identity, which is 1. So if I give you the number 1/2, what would I multiply 1/2 by to give me 1?
Negative 2 over 1.
2 over 1. What is that called? Do you guys remember? Reciprocal. So opposite or additive identity changes the sign. Or additive inverse changes the sign. Multiplicative inverse just flips it. The sign stays the same. So what is the multiplicative inverse of negative 3 over 4? Negative 4 over 3. The sign stays the same. Okay? Additive inverse changes the sign. Multiplicative inverse just flips the number. The sign stays the same. Yeah, we can write that. Sign stays the same. Okay? So write that note.